United Nations facing dire liquidity meltdown due to corona crisis, according to this article off SputnikNews.com. CBS News cited an email from a top UN official saying the United Nations is facing a dire financial meltdown due to its additional expenses in response to the COVID-19 crisis. And in my opinion, this is a continuation of the breaking of the great horn of the he-goat, which is the United Nations. Last year we saw articles like the death knell is ringing for the UN and United Nations faces worst cash crisis in a decade, so evidently the breaking of the great horn of the he-goat in Daniel chapter 8 verse 8 happens gradually. The United States having pulled out of UNESCO and the Human Rights Organization over the past several years, and in 2018 a foreignpolicy.com article was published called Trump Stealthily Seeks to Choke Off Funding to UN Programs. Foreign Policy being founded by Samuel Huntington, who worked with Zbigniew Brzezinski in the Carter administration, and replacing the United Nations is also part of the strategy for a global government laid out on the last page of the Grand Chessboard written by Zbigniew Brzezinski. The United Nations replaced the League of Nations, and the New World Order you can read of in Revelation chapter 13 will replace the Great Horn of the He-Goat you can read of in Daniel chapter 8, which is the United Nations, in my opinion. The Great Horn of the He-Goat being the same thing as the one who sends a raiser of taxes, to properly translate Daniel chapter 11 verse 20. The Paris Climate Accord having been brought about by the UN, and a global carbon tax is the ultimate eventuality of a global climate agreement. But this November, the United States will be able to officially pull out of the agreement. Official U.S. exit from Paris Climate Accord begins, as you can see from these articles from November 5th, 2019. The United States being the current king of the South, according to the Daniel 11 hypothesis, ever since 1945, which is also when the United Nations came into being. And as you can see in Daniel chapter 11 verse 14, in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision of a one world government, that is to say, but they shall fall. And that word fall in this case means to fail. There will be no new world order, as it's called, until Satan and his angels are cast to earth at the woe of the fifth trumpet, after the United Nations is broken, so to speak. So they'll attempt to create a one world system, but they shall fail. The UN is even wanting at least 10% of the global GDP, according to this article, about their so-called COVID-19 plan to build a better world, exalting themselves to the point of asking for a tenth, which is what tithe means even. But again, they shall fail. The one world political system written of in Revelation chapter 13 will not emerge until Satan and his angels, who are Daniel's fourth beast, are cast to earth at the woe of the fifth trumpet, at the beginning of the 5-month-long hour of temptation, when the dragon, who is that old serpent called the devil and Satan, stands on the sand of the sea, which is how Revelation chapter 13 verse 1 should really be translated. The dragon stood on the sand of the sea, and then I, John the Revelator as he's called, that is to say, saw a beast rise up out of the sea, which is symbolic of peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues, having 7 heads, which are 7 mountains, literally, meaning the 7 continents of the planet Earth, and 10 horns, which are 10 fallen angel kings, who, as we know from Daniel chapter 7, are part of the exclusively supernatural fourth beast in that chapter. We also see in Revelation 13 that this one world political system will be like unto a leopard, with feet as the feet of a bear and a mouth as the mouth of a lion. The other 3 beasts you can read of in Daniel chapter 7, along with the 4th beast, which again is exclusively supernatural. 4 is the number of earth in biblical numerics, and the 4 beasts that make up the one world system of Revelation 13 are the 4 notable ones you can read of in Daniel chapter 8 verse 8 that don't emerge until after the great horn of the he-goat is broken, so to speak, which is also the one who sends a raiser of taxes in Daniel chapter 11 verse 20. The United Nations, in my opinion, and once it's broken or destroyed, same word in the Hebrew, the new world order emerges at the woe of the fifth trumpet, which is the upgrading of the existing UN structures talked about on the last page of the Grand Chessboard. And then the so-called new world order is wounded to death, so to speak, as you can also see in Revelation chapter 13. And then at the woe of the sixth trumpet, Satan appears as Antichrist in Jerusalem, the little horn written of in Daniel chapter 7 and 8. Little because he only gets 2.5 months as Antichrist once the one world political system becomes a one world religious system, and those 70 evenings begin, the final 2.5 months, which the 70 years in captivity to Babylon were a type of. Satan in his role of Antichrist being the king of Babylon of the end times, the false Christ. The true Christ doesn't return at all until immediately immediately after that 5-month-long hour of temptation at the woe of the seventh trumpet. And as the true Christ says in the last verse of Mark chapter 13, what I say unto you, I say unto all, watch.